back with another edition of The Exchange presented by Confederation Group. A day late on our recording, I guess, but it's Casual Friday, as you can tell. Here with Blake Doyle, another scorcher of a week, Blake.
Scorcher of the week in the house and outside the house.
Yeah.
In fact, we've been working so hard, we haven't had time to shave or comb our hair, so we're both wearing hats. But we've been just combing through this budget, and I've got I collect these budget addresses, kind of like some people might collect coins. I've got them back for many, many years, and they used to be blue books. They actually are great paperweights. But we did an article in the Guardian this week, talked a little bit about this budget, and I'm sure it'll be discussed in the House over the next few days as well. Any quick thoughts on it, Sam?
I think the biggest thing, obviously, during a pandemic, it's hard to criticize right now. But the idea of running a $173 million deficit is a little alarming for someone like myself who has to pay for it the next 50 years or so. But a term that Richard Brown used when he was in opposition when Pat Binns was in government was the fudged budget. And that's kind of what came to mind right away when I saw the deficit spending. But yeah, like I said, it's hard to criticize. We won't know probably for the next year or 2 years what the actual effects of the pandemic will be. So I guess good that they got one out, because I was scared that they weren't actually gonna, because it was supposed to be an emergency sitting. But now that they have it out and good, then we can make suggestions and see what happens. And that's what it is too. It's just a budget. Like, obviously you want to stick as close as you can as that, but things will happen, and they could spend more or spend less. We don't know.
Now, we did invite the Minister of Finance, Darlene Compton, to come on to the show through her sort of associates, her department. I'm sure she's very busy. She's probably got lots of organizations to communicate with, including the Chamber of Commerce, and she's still in the House, really still presenting and defending her submissions. So she's always welcome. We'd love to have her on, and I think next week, once this sort of is fully digested, it would be great to have Minister Compton, but certainly we'd love to have some people with opposing views, and we'll probably ask some of the opposition members to come on, give us their perspectives, some of whom have been very, really praised the budget, very pleased and helped in the construction of it, and others it seems like maybe they weren't part of the process because they don't seem that pleased.
Yeah, no, and that's what I've noticed too. It's kind of, I guess, both opposition parties everyone has their own opinion on it. I think my thoughts are that the Greens are going a little easy on them because of the pandemic kind of quotation at the air. Like, it's through a pandemic, so we can spend a little more, but at the same time, you have to be strong fiscal stewards to make sure that there is a plan in place, but where can we make some room for improvements? And I think you noted also just kind of the raise in salaries across basically all departments, kind of like a COVID clause across all departments with, I forget how many $1 million. And also the idea that we're going to make more money next year than this year. Like, they're projecting crazy numbers that are a little unrealistic. I think that's my biggest concern.
And when you listen to the rhetoric of opposition, which should generally be critical, and I think there's some criticisms from both Heath MacDonald and Michelle Beaton. Michelle maybe was more actively involved in the construction of the document because she seems to administer a little bit more praise. I think one of the detractions of having a coalition government or a minority government is that you do have to homogenize your positions and kind of blend everything to come up with an agreeable approach, which this document clearly is. And when you can't enforce your policy, sometimes it's expensive. And again, this document probably is expensive. One thing that you commented on, Sam, was the projected growth of the economy. And, I think in my article, I commented on that as well. It is an aggressive target. If the province hits it, that's great. We have had a number of great years where the province has been growing, except, in fact, punching above our weight as far as our growth. But the growth rates might be ambitious. The U.S. economy, the stock market, big business is growing well. Small business, which is what primarily PEI is, I don't think is going to see that same acceleration. And I think those numbers are going to be deficits, probably, in my opinion, might be a little larger than what's projected just based on the underlying assumption of the growth.
Yeah, and we won't know until, I guess, like a year later. It's usually, I guess, March is the year end for government. But like you said, we really don't know. And they are aggressive and ambitious. But I think the idea of raising taxes and all these deferred, whether there's mortgage payments or whether it's deferred property tax, it'll all add up. And whenever there's a bill around, let's say, Christmas time, people might be hurting a little more than right now.
Well, especially if the economy closes down, which is what the expectation is. We're going to endure this. Florida, I think, has 3,200 cases now a day. Like, they're not doing well at the moment. We are, but I think if this thing spreads, it's a good chance we'd be affected as well this fall.
So we likely aren't going to go to Universal Studios for Christmas this year, is what you're saying.
You may not go to Universal Studios at the Cineplex. I don't know. Yeah, I think school's going to resume. That's a big deal. I think parents got to be happy about that. Let's see how long it can last and what that structure looks like. But I think it's going to be a tough restart, not just the fall, but I think businesses are going to realize by mid-July that this is difficult.
And it plays a big part. Like a lot of it's just speculation. Like we don't know whether there's going to be a spike in cases the end of August, the end of September, the end of October, but you have to plan for it. And obviously this budget does that. And the announcement that school is going to resume in the fall does that. It's to progress forward regardless of what may be negative in the negative mindset around COVID. But yeah, like it's kind of startling just to see or just to think about what might happen if the economy were to close down again and the effect that would have on the budget that's already a large deficit.
Yeah, so I think viral sort of movement would tend to be later in the fall. I would think late October, November, when people kind of get indoors and there's less airflow. One of the things that's happening in the States, I think the States have made it pretty clear that there's absolutely no way they'd shut down the economy. It's up to individual states, but if you can see the reaction of Texas and North Carolina and Florida and some of these places, they're opening their economies despite maybe they never even suppressed the first wave of this, so they're seeing some spikes. One thing I think the CDC might have suggested is wearing masks is one of the simplest things you can do that may affect a civil liberty, but it's a lot less impact on your civil liberties than quarantining people and closing your businesses. So I don't see business closure really being an option for any government in Canada or the US going forward. I think they're going to have to find ways to adapt, protect vulnerable people, and use PPE like masks if that helps to mitigate. But yeah, anyway, back to your projections. I mean, it's not just the projected deficit. There's tax rebates, which I'm an advocate for. Under good conditions, that is a great thing to do. If you don't hit your numbers, those tax rebates are going to be short-lived. And I think it's going to be more complex than just reversing tax rebates. I think it's going to affect some austerity probably within government because there's no place else to take that from. There'll be no tax base. I don't think personal. And I don't think there'll be it from business because I don't think they're going to generate enough tax revenue. So I think the onus of any additional suppression or cost, I don't know how much more deficit can run. It's got to come from someplace. And you hire new people. Are they the first to go, or is it a way to sort of trend other people out? Maybe there's succession, maybe there's attrition, maybe there's retirements. But that's what I'd be conscious of over the next 18 months.
I agree. So we will move on from the budget, but did you have any last, noted comments on the budget?
There's an article out in today's Guardian. That's a great place to look. I think, in general, it's a lot of money. And in, I guess, consideration of the government's position, you can't suspend the economy. That occurred universally across the globe. I think in retrospect, it was a bad decision. It did maybe suppress some of the viral incidents. That's positive from a health perspective, but there's economic impacts to that. So one of those is the government have to spend their way out of that. They've done that provincially and federally, and I support that as a necessary inducement. Part of the challenge is how do you decouple that and how do you transition out of these inducements? We've seen some things the federal government have done recently, which will probably be challenged by business. But boy, this is a tough situation. Not taking action, decisive action, as the provincial government has done, is much worse than maybe spending, too much. So better to make a decision and adapt to it. And, I referenced Jay Powell's testimony to Congress where, he's going to do everything he can to make sure the economy maintains its vibrancy. He's got lots of tools and levers, and he'll use them all. And you see the stock market at least respond to that at this point. Hopefully that trickles through the base of the economy, and then hopefully that permeates up here into Canada.
And like we've talked a lot of it before, like it's kind of like been a company mantra, I guess, is the idea that progress over perfection. So put something out that you can adapt to. That's exactly what the government's doing because we don't know what the next 6, 12, 18 months is going to look like. So you have to put something out to kind of have some sort of guideline. But it's a little alarming to see such increases in whether it's salaries and also the idea that we're going to take in more money than we did last year or we're going to have more growth. It's confusing.
Let's hope they're right.
Well, yeah, if they're right, everything should be okay. But
they've got
we'll
good
see what happens.
economists. I'm going to defer to the fact that they've got good people giving them guidance, and hopefully they're correct in their assumptions. If they're not, it's a very compounded challenge. But I'm going to defer to the fact they've got people better than us to evaluate this. And the growth rate is strong. especially if the economy had been strong. It's strong coming out of a pandemic. My fingers are crossed that they've got their hand in the tiller and they know what's going on. So if they do that, we'll all do well and employment will spike and the economy would be great. 8.6% is a pretty aggressive growth target. So if we hit that, the challenge is going to be to find labor and find space because there's going to be a lot of activity.
Yeah, and like I said, we could hope for the best. Anyways, we'll move on from the budget. I'm sure that'll be debated numerous times over the next couple of weeks in the legislature. I don't think they're getting out anytime soon. I would say my guess would be another 3 weeks.
Boy, it's getting hot. They've never sat this long. They're going to be screaming to get out.
It was 30 degrees every day this week, and next week's supposed to be high 20s again. So maybe they'll turn off the air conditioners to get them out of there or something.
Well, the air conditioning is probably better in this building than it was in the previous building. So maybe they're comfortable to stay all summer.
Maybe. I don't know if anyone wants to. They want to get on the road and then see their constituents. But still on politics, last night was the first Conservative Party of Canada leadership debate.
You would have watched that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You're glued to that?
Watched it like a hawk. No, I was not watching it, but just the idea that at least they're getting that going, because we could have, after this pandemic, I would assume Justin Trudeau will pull the trigger and have another election in the minority situation because he wants to get a few more seats and have the majority. Sorry. So we'll see what happens there. Do you have any favorites in that race?
Yeah, I guess the issue is who is watching it. I'm not even sure that Conservatives are watching it too closely. It means bad time of year to be trying to get people's attention. So we've got two governments, neither of which really have the funds to hold an election federally and provincially. I still am not sure who's going to flinch first. I think it's in both their advantages to try to get to the polls. Clearly, nobody can afford this. I'm not sure that the countries or provinces need it, but if you're a political strategist, this is a time. Things may not necessarily get better. And if you look at some of the growth projections we talked about in the budget, if things deteriorate, you don't want to be going into the polls at a negative time, and you don't want to lose control of the timing, which you can in a minority situation. So I don't know. I'd be watching for people to trigger something this fall. I just don't know who's going to flinch first, federal or provincial.
The longer COVID goes on, people were very happy with the government's response, up to date. There was a couple, like the cottage goers, who are actually this weekend, they're allowed to, some of them are coming in from off island, but
you know what? Not all islanders are happy with that.
No, I agree, but maybe that'll bring some new money in. But I think the longer COVID goes on, yes, we're happy government's response, we're happy with the public health office, but the longer it goes on, people are just getting sick and tired of waiting for an update on Facebook Live through the government page. So I think the more, now it's more time to kind of not sit back and relax, but to lessen the announcements, just because people eventually are going to get kind of stockpiled up and sick of them, and sick with the government of the day, because that's who's administering them.
Yeah, you looked at those numbers early on the pandemic, like the viewers, I think it was like 7,000, and I hadn't watched lately. I think most people probably tuned out, but it can't be much more than a couple thousand, I wouldn't think, at this point. So I'm not sure. I know it's beneficial, media picking up and rebroadcasting, but there's not much new to say. Everybody probably needs a break. If there's valuable information, report that. Give Heather Morrison a rest. Let her enjoy some of the summer, because I think everybody, including her, going to be maybe busier this fall. So catch your breath and enjoy this while we can, and be ready.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking of news rebroadcasting, Compass is this week got back to a full 60 minutes. So people are happy.
Wow. Wow. We could probably get a segment on there. They may need content. We could be filler. Yeah. We could even take our hats off for that.
Yeah, I say we'd have to comb our hair maybe. But just on that last note, last week after our interview with Paul McNeil, he was actually on talking about the legislature thus far. And he kind of reiterated what he said on our podcast about the idea of the change in legislature hours and what that actually means. But just wanted to give another shout out to Paul, because he did a great job on CBC again.
Well, and he's got his new podcast is out. So he's a podcast competitor or collaborator. I guess we're a collaborative environment. Paul does have a podcast as well, and he's got his second version, I think, is live now. So if people want to pick that up, you can go to Canada.com and sort of link through to his podcast.
Yeah.
13 ways to kill a community. As if 2 wasn't enough.
No. And there's probably going to be more sprout up as COVID goes on. But I think we'll probably end it there and maybe enjoy our sunny Friday afternoon. It's a scorcher or a corker, however you want to define it. It's going to be a nice weekend. So I guess we'll get back to work and then go maybe enjoy the evening.
And next week, I think, as a follow-up, I mean, we've got still some legislative commentary for our public affairs component of our podcast. We'll have some guests on that can talk in a little bit more detail about their perspectives on this budget. And we, of course, would always welcome somebody from government side, whether that's Minister Compton or somebody else from cabinet. But we'll extend that invitation and hope to have a balanced perspective when we do get to talk a little bit more detail on this budget. I've combed through it. I've made assessments on percentage changes, most of which are all increased in expenditures. But let's let the experts sort of have their say, and we look forward to them sharing their thoughts on our podcast.
Yeah, and throughout the next week, I guess we'll kind of see it uncovered in debate in the legislature. So I'm sure we'll have a more pinpointed description. What we have today, like our discussion, was just kind of more speculation. But now I think as debate goes on, we'll see a little bit more of pointed reasoning for increases or whatever. So yeah, I look forward to that.
Great. Let's enjoy the weather. We can tell all the MLAs locked indoors how great it is outdoors,
Yeah.
and they can sweat inside in their ties.
Pick them up on the boat out down at Peaks.
Yes. I don't know if I have enough anchors, but we'll see. Anyway, we're always happy to take people for a drive.
Yeah. So this has been another edition of The Exchange, Casual Friday, I guess you could call it, presented by Confederation Group, and we'll see you next time.